Can't Escape the Magic by Art Fox. Chapter 17. The dense fog from the canal shimmered in the moonlight. It curled and swirled in the cold night air. Sinbad shivered as the cold ocean breeze swept over him. Brr! It gets so cold at night, he complained. Mesmer gave him a bored look. Yes, it does. He held the only lantern they had with them and took a few steps away from his whining gang. Hey, idiot, don't move! Sinbad pressed up against his friend's back and used the funnelies to hide away from the wind. Mesmer shoved a thick arm back to push his gang away and grumbled, Please don't use me as a windshield. The two men pushed and shoved against each other in the darkened alley. The mansion they were guarding had thick marble walls and huge bronze lion statues mounted at each entrance. Thin light filtered from the high window. You two damn thing, quit all your join and watch this place properly. I only got 2 guards because the military is short-handed. I'm so anxious I can't even eat my dinner. The rich merchant was disgustingly obese with thick body hair and a nasty look in his eye. He had a thick chicken leg in his pudgy grip and grease dripped down his thick chins. 2 young women were close behind him. They looked disgusted but resigned to their company. Sinbad guessed that the pretty women had recently tried to circumvent general poverty of Balbad by turning to prostitution. They haven't quite perfected the prostitute's facade yet. A small flush of pity rose in him at the young girl's unfavorable company. He certainly wouldn't want to be in their place. He's still eating. Mesmer deadpanned, staring up at the window. He was not impressed with the fat man's demands. He's privileged, all right. Sinbad rubbed his arms against the chill, ignoring the irony of a king saying such a statement. A clatter behind them drew their attention. From the dense fog, a figure appeared. Sinbad and Mesmer tensed, but the fog revealed a disheveled woman staggering toward them, clutching a bundle of cloths to her chest. She stumbled forward, and Sinbad reached his arms out to catch her. Hey, are you alright? Do you need help? He felt her bony shoulders cut into his forearms. A snick of a blade gave Sinbad enough warning to drop his arms and leap back. What the heck? Sinbad yelped in surprise. After the failed attack, the woman staggered past them and fell to her knees. The fog dispersed to reveal that the 2 men were surrounded by a group of bedraggled citizens. Each carried a makeshift weapon. A shovel, a broken oar, a few half-rusted kitchen knives, and chipped swords. They all were malnourished and covered by dirty, ripped rags. Their eyes were dead, desperate, and most had a crazed gleam in them. Their limbs were bony, and folds of skin hung off them in disgusting consistency. The first woman dragged herself back to her feet and faced Mesmer and Sinbad. She brandished her knife at them defiantly. I have nothing, she muttered. No milk to give him. Her voice gained strength. I need food, no matter what it takes. If you try to stop me, she ended on a scream. I'll kill you! Her eyes were wide and desperate. Sinbad's eyes latched onto the bundle she was clutching to her chest. One tiny twig-like arm dangled out of it. Sinbad felt the blood drain from his face, and a stone hand clenched around his heart. His brain shuddered, and his breath stopped. This mob wasn't the fog troop. These were the common people of Balbad. These people were what was left of the country his friend Rashid had ruled. A voice from above broke him out of his horror-filled revelation. It was the ugly, fat merchant. Mongrels from the slums! Pitiful! He tossed his half-gnawed chicken leg out of the window to the crowd. Take this! Go away! The peasant woman gasped at the sight of food. She scrambled to get to the scraps before the others, falling to her knees with one hand reaching outstretched to the half-eaten food. Suddenly, Sinbad slapped her hand away and held it securely with one arm looped around her narrow shoulders. There's no need for you to do that, he comforted her. Remember, he's only wealthy from your taxes. The woman stood. The rest of the crowd came closer to Sinbad and stared at him with wide, desperate eyes. And if you don't believe it's worth paying, then take back as much as you want. But don't take any lives. The crowd nodded and scurried away toward the mansion. Sinbad gave one more glance back at the tiny woman with a baby. She didn't spare him a backward glance as she darted into the estate, eager to get some food from inside. The king turned his back on the mansion and walked past Mesmer, who stared at him. You sure? The finalist asked. We only made one promise, and that was to find and capture the fog troop. Sinbad looked mournfully up at the sky. The moon was full. This country may already be a lost cause. He thought of all the hard work and the years of effort King Rashid had put into making Balbad a prosperous and peaceful nation, and how after only a few years of his absence had torn it all away. Thoughts of his own country filled his head, and Sinbad for the first time thought about what his people would do if he died. Who would they depend on? Who would lead and protect them and their interests? Rashid had 2 sons, 2 heirs that he entrusted with the future of his country, and they failed him. Sinbad vowed to leave a better future for his people. He would not allow Sindria to fall to the way of Balbad. The moon rested far above the coastal city. The peaks of the tallest buildings gently relinquished the warmth captured from the day. The waves of heat escaping to the sky made it seem as if the stars were swaying to and fro. On the other side of the capital city, Cinna stared out to the stars from the window of the hotel room. Noct was nearby, cuddled with one of the many pillows that covered the bed. The tan boy was sleeping better than he had in years. He fell asleep mumbling about how the bed was the most comfortable thing he ever felt in his life. Cinna watched over his friend, his best friend. For who else could this kindly boy be? Noct had tried his best to protect Cinna from Fatima whenever his temper flared, had taught him the ins and outs of the desert base, had the strength of character to retain compassion in the most difficult of situations. Noct was Cinna's best friend. That was all he had now. He had Ron and Hermione in the before, and of course nothing and no one could replace them. But they were gone, and Cinna knew that he had to move on. He wasn't Harry Potter anymore. Harry Potter had died before his 18th birthday. Harry Potter would never finish school. Harry Potter had died in the middle of a war. Harry Potter was gone. He was Cinna now. Cinna wasn't a war veteran. Cinna wasn't a wizard. Cinna didn't have a wand or a broomstick or anything that Harry had. Cinna was the 7-year-old son of a whore. Cinna was a former slave. Cinna was Noct's best friend. He wouldn't survive in this world by being Harry. Harry couldn't even survive in his own reality. He had to be better this time. Smarter, more cunning, cleverer, and stronger. Because he hadn't succeeded as Harry. He had died. And yes, his death meant that Voldemort would die too. But that wasn't good enough. So many people had suffered and died before he finally managed to get that far. Cinna knew it was more than a little arrogant to think he could save everyone. Hermione would have called it his saving people thing. But that was a little bit okay here. Because in this world, he wasn't trying to save everybody. His top priority would be those closest to him. And right now, that was Noct. And maybe Morgiana and Aladdin too. He wouldn't consider Sinbad, Jafar, and Mazrur close until he knew what exactly their intentions were. The small purplet readjusted in his seat. From the high window of the hotel, he could stare out onto the rolling clouds of fog creeping through the city. It was a pale specter that swept through the city. It carried the scent of the sea and the chill of the desert's night. But the chill could not reach him this high up. The sandstone that made the hotel still clung onto the heat of the day. He and Noct would be warm and safe in this room. Cinna's brow furrowed as he thought a bit more on that. It was more than a bit strange that a random chance meeting with a naked man would result in them staying in the finest hotel in the country, and that the random naked man would end up being a king of a foreign nation. Cinna was more than a bit suspicious on how far the King Sinbad's kindness would stretch for 2 former slave children with nothing of note to offer him in his country. Especially when one slave made a point to undermine and insult him at every turn. Cinna knew that his constant needling Sinbad made Noct dizzy with anxiousness. The younger boy was worried that Cinna would push too far and they would be punished. But he just couldn't help it. It seems like the man known as Sinbad was an ocean of compassion and kindness. Nothing Cinna did or said angered him in any way. He didn't trust it. No adult was that kind to a child that wasn't theirs. Every adult he had come across as Cinna, and even most adults he knew as Harry Potter, wanted to use him or was needlessly cruel to him. With only a few glaring exceptions like Molly Weasley, Madame Pomfrey, and Professor McGonagall. Even Sirius, for all that he loved him, had rare moments where he saw Harry as little more than a shadow of James Potter. It seemed that just about every adult in both Cinna and Harry's lives was an utter disappointment to the boy. Cinna believed it was only a matter of time before the king and his friends got tired of their kindly charade and showed their true colors. It was more than a little suspicious that Aladdin and Morgiana got their own private rooms, while Cinna and Noct were staying in the adults' extra bedroom. Maybe they were involved in the slave trade or wanted to use the boys as decoys or bargaining chips in their fight against the Fog Troop. That was one reason why Cinna insisted on being a part of the planning and why he wanted to join the fighting, for all the good it did him. Cinna quietly asked Noct what he thought about the men, but the silver-haired boy had only the best impression of the adults and nearly praised them on the divine levels. Cinna couldn't blame him, though. For a child who would know nothing but punishment and cruelty at the hands of adults, meeting ones that seemed so nice must be like meeting some sort of benevolent gods. Even he was a little taken in by the generosity shown. If he hadn't retained his memories of Harry Potter, then he too would undoubtedly be blinded by the apparent goodness of these men. But there wasn't anything for him to do at this point beyond remaining alert and standing guard over Noct. He wouldn't allow anything to take his dearest friend in this life. No, he wouldn't let Noct suffer any more of this world's harshness. Sinbad followed Masrur to the secondary site. They were following the sound of a huge explosion. As they entered the courtyard, Sinbad gaped at the sheer destruction of the area. Guards were flung haphazardly on the ground, and the outer wall was nothing more than a gaping hole. Sinbad rushed ahead and began searching for survivors. Jafar! Aladdin! Morgiana! Are you there? Jafar! A grumble from the left answered him. Yes, Sin, we're all right. It was Jafar. The petite man was resting against the side wall. The wall shielded Jafar from the morning light shining in the area. Morgiana was sitting next to him, waving a hand in front of a despondent Aladdin. The tiny Magi had a strange expression on, and his eyes were shakingly blank. Sinbad gave Jafar a concerned look and tilted his head toward the young boy. Jafar shook his head and mouthed later at his king. After ensuring everyone was in relatively good health, Sinbad and Masrur joined in on the examination of the battle site. Jafar quietly explained what happened during the night and the revelations that they met with. Sinbad was not pleased with the news. But still, whoever thought there would be a dungeon capturer in the Fog Troop, not to mention Aladdin's dear friend? Just who is this Ali Baba the Wonder? He wondered aloud, not noticing Morgiana suddenly sniffing the area for a certain scent. Masrur, who did notice, chose not to say anything. It wasn't his business what the girl did. After the various guards were roused and treated for their minor injuries, Sinbad led the group back to the hotel. The tanned king kept a steady hand on the still shell-shocked Magi. The hotel was bustling with gossip when they returned. It seemed everyone had heard of the attack and peasant riots in the merchant district. Many nobles thought it safer to relocate to the luxury hotel than risk remaining in their own homes. As they walked through the lobby, Jafar kept a steady commentary whispered in Sinbad's ear. Many nobles are fleeing the capital, taking all of the gold and silver they can smuggle out with them. The smart ones are living in ships just beyond the coast. The less intelligent are taking the desert roads and don't last very long with all the bandits and slave traders. Interesting. And speaking of slave traders, Sinbad mumbled, eyeing Jafar significantly, I'll collect our package along with Masrur after we check that Cinna and Noct have breakfast. Jafar promised. Masrur nodded subtly next to them in agreement. I can handle breakfast by myself, Sinbad pouted. With Cinna's attitude and Aladdin's melancholy? All by yourself. Are you sure? Fine. Sinbad turned to Morgiana and Aladdin in front of the room. We're going to be quiet in case Noct and Cinna are still sleeping, okay? Yes. Morgiana nodded obediently, and normally talkative Aladdin was still painfully stoic. Okay. The five of them all entered the hotel room quietly. Morgiana and Aladdin sat on the couch, and Masrur took a seat on the other side from them. Jafar and Sinbad both went into the bedroom and carefully eased the door open. They peeked in and instantly melted with highly unmanly caves, though neither of them would ever admit to doing so. Noct was curled sweetly amidst the multitude of pillows on the bed, his snowy hair spread out around him loosely like a halo. Cinna was propped against the window frame, cuddled with a small pillow, snoring softly. The morning sunlight made his violet hair shimmer. It seems Cinna was up late waiting for us last night, Jafar whispered to Sinbad. His grey eyes were soft at the sight of the two boys. Sinbad felt a warm flutter in his heart. Cinna was concerned for them. For him! It was a very pleasing feeling. I'll see. I'll wake Cinna. Could you get Noct? Jafar nodded. Of course. The young advisor went to the bed and Sinbad approached the window. Sina, time to wake up. This time Sinbad kept a small distance from the young boy, weary of flailing limbs. See, I did it for my mistakes, Jafar. The smaller boy woke up with a snort and disgruntled bleary glare at Sinbad. Ugh, what? What do you want? He groaned, rubbing his sleepy, encrusted eyes. Good morning to you too, Sinner. It's time for breakfast, so let's get up and get dressed. Sinbad kept a smile on his face despite Sinner's bad mood. He must not be a morning person, Sinbad thought indulgently. Noct was groggy and uncoordinated as he stumbled out of bed. We'll be outside with the others. Just come out when you're dressed, okay, boys? Sinbad told the boys from the doorway. Sinna grumbled at him, tugging the green robe from before out of the dresser drawer. Yeah, just go, old man. And the door shut behind the two adults. Jafar? Sinbad turned to his friend as they walked to the central room, his tone strange and purposefully nonchalant. Yes, my king? Jafar flicked a watchful eye on him. I decided not to tell Sinna the truth until we are en route to Sindria, Sinbad declared. So be discreet and make sure you tell Masrur as well. I understand. I'll tell him when we fetch the traders, Jafar said, his voice decidedly non-judgmental. There were times when Sinbad needed his counsel on matters, and times when he didn't. Jafar knew this was not one of those times he needed to speak his mind. So, within the hour, Sinbad impressed, a glint of steel in his golden eyes. Yes, within the hour, Jafar confirmed, knowing how eager his king was for revenge on his son's behalf. Good. Then the two men entered the central room with calm smiles. Neither Morgiana nor Aladdin noticed how bloodthirsty their eyes were behind those smiles.